Hey, welcome to Section 3, Loft Apartment in Daylight. We're going to go through these tutorials and we'll start loading the 3ds Max scene into our 3ds Max. And this tutorial has been modified to V-Ray 3.5. So please ignore the version on top of the capture screen in case you do see them, which is okay. It had been updated. Let's take a look at 3ds Max. We just loaded this chapter 02-00*01 in 3ds Max 2018. We need to do several things here. We need to load two very important objects into our 3ds Max. The first one is the camera. The second one is a light. You do need a light source in order to render. And then also we need to set up a default test material to assign to all other material, and we're going to render this. It's mostly like a white rendering, but we're able to see the silhouette and detail of the rendering. So let's do it. First thing we need to do, we need to set up the camera. So let's go camera. Go to see physical camera. V-Ray physical camera now has been transformed into 3ds Max. A default camera now is called physical camera. On the top viewport, so we're going to drag this camera in our screen. Now you can see from the front viewports, the screen need to be lifted, which is okay. We're going to switch now into our perspective view, and we're going to change the view to camera physical camera 001. Now we need to visualize as you moving this around. You can see the camera's being lifted, and we need to zoom a little closer. So we're going to zoom a little closer to the screen so to set up our rendering a little better. Next thing we need to do is very simple. We need to load a light. So we're going to go light, and we're going to go on for the rollout to V-Ray, and we're going to look for V-Ray light. And under the lights, we're going to go turn it on and change the type of light to dome light. Now we shouldn't be doing anything else. We certainly can somehow change the multiplier, or we can also change the camera setting so to accommodate more lights into the camera. But we're going to set up the first lights route. I just do it very simple. From the top viewport, load this dome lights. It's important that the dome light is somehow located on the top, and you can see it's flush onto the ground. And next thing we do is we need to set up our camera. So now go to the modifier, physical camera. So everything we need to do. We have the basic stuff. We can turn the target on and off, but we do need a target. Target helps us to aim at the location where we want to look at the rendering. Next thing we need to do, we can have the apertures, the f-stop, to use number 8, setting this number into the other number, such as the film speed. These two somehow need to be locked. In the future lesson, we will certainly change the f-stop, talk about the reason why you need to lower the f-stop number, but by default is 8. We're going to leave it 8 right at this point. Now let's move along. We need to change the shutter speed to 1/2 and then we need to somehow untouch this number. This is the speed of the shuttle, so this speed will adjust the lights, how fast into the camera. Longer the exposure, brighter the image will be. We're going to leave this to 480 as a default, or 1000, whatever you have right now. And the exposure, again, ISO, we need to turn this into menu. We're going to start 800. It's an interior light, interior scene, so we can actually set this up to 400 to 800, If it's exterior scene, it will be roughly 100 to 200. So 800 should be adequate. 800 should be okay. We certainly can somehow set this a default 800. Then we have the f-stop number 8. The only thing we need to do is change this number. Let's do a rendering right now. We're gonna go now render setup, and we're gonna make sure that we're using renderer V-Ray Advanced 3.603 or 0.5 above. Important thing that we need to do before we render, we need to set up a material. We're gonna go now to material using the compact material editor. You see the flower icons there. We're not going to do the lower to use the slate material editor. We're going to use the compact material editor. And right here we're going to create a test material. We're going to call this a test material, and under the basic material, and right next to the test material there's a V-Ray MTL rollout. So we're going to basically go on for it, go all the way to V-Ray, choose one of a wonderful material called V-Ray MTL, and we're going to select that, and then we're going to change now the diffuse color to 230. So we need to be somehow a little of white, 230, and we're going to name this test hyphen materials. Now next thing we do is we're going to set up all the objects here. Just roughly just assign them to from the material to selection. We're going to render this a white color. Now you can go to the viewports setup. You can change to solid colors. You can take out the edges surface, and I'm going to maximize this so you can slowly see the your screen will interpret. That depends on whether you have a very good graphic card. Slowly you will see the silhouette shows up, and that will basically give you some rendering. We're going to go back there and take the edge face on so we can see a little more detail of our objects in the structure of our meshes. Now let's go get to the rendering now. And we're going to make sure that we go to V-Ray common, and we want to make sure we enable V-Ray built-in frame buffer. Make sure the memory frame buffer is checked. We're going to uncheck get from the resolution from max. We're going to use the V-Ray its own built-in frame buffer, so we're going to bypass max. Next thing, we're going to go down there. We're going to go there to the image sampler, choose from bucket, and we want to make sure maximum subdivision is 1, and basically use the default, and the rest of them default. This is actually okay for the initial renderings. Next, we're going to go to GI, the global illumination. Make sure the enable GI is on. Then we're going to choose two things: primary engine and secondary engine. The primary engines we want to choose irradiance map, and the secondary engine we're going to choose light cache. Now on for the irradiance map, we're going to choose something very low, so you can also choose the minimum rate -4 and maximum rate -3, but I would basically just choose very low. And light cache, somehow we should at this stage keep it very low too, about 300 or 500 at this point, not very low, because we're just going to do an initial rendering here right now. And now we're going to do it. We're just going to render this in very fast and low rate. Oh, pretty good. Now we see some stuff here, and very important things, want to make sure that in case display color in sRGB space is checked on, so you can see the lights actually show up a little lighter. We can do several things here. Make sure that this is on, the sRGB space display color is on, so we see a little more brighter images. Next, we need to correct this a little bit. We're going to go back to my full pane view. Now select my camera and go to modifier, and now we're going to lower all the way. We can change the f-stop, or we can somehow change the shutter speed. So in this case, we're going to change the shutter speed. Now if we want the light to permit more light into our camera, we need to prolong the speed of the shutter speed. Since this is 1 over the second, it means this number, if it decrease, you actually allow more light into the camera, hence your image will be brighter. If you make this a larger number, quite the contrary, your scene will be darker. So we're going to roughly drop about 300. We're going to render it again. You can render this to speed up your rendering. You can do a render region to see what's going on. Oh, instantly you can tell your image has been much brighter. But overall, it's a whitewash rendering, but you begin to see a lot of detail, a lot of things on your scene already. Okay, our next step now is to do two things. We need to load a material library, the chapter 2, the section 2, loading to our material, and we're going to basically drag and drop or assign to material selection to the objects. And second thing we need to do, we need to assign a V-Ray light, so then we can have cast shadows. Our rendering will look much better. So we're going to cancel the frame buffer, and next thing we need to do, cancel everything, and we need to go to the material, go to the compact material editors. Now we're going to go to this, in the lower portion of the material editor. There's something called get material, a little icon here. We're going to click that. It's called material-map browser. This browser will give you an overall view what you have, everything that relates to your scene. It's pretty effective in compact material editor. Now we're going to load this, go into that little arrow, and we're going to load up open material library. We're going to open a material library. We're going to load this up to where I have the quite a lot of stuff here, so okay, now we're going to load this chapter from the chapter 02. We're going to load the chapter 2 material library. Now you will see the loading process started happening after chapter 2 MAT. You have floor bouquet, you have pictures for the painting, you have the wall brick natures, you have leather, you have glass, you have all the rest of them, and we can just basically, we're gonna load them one by one. Start from the second one. We're gonna go do this floor bouquet, and we're gonna load the pictures frame. Oh, I really load this already. Picture frame, and then we're going to load the brick wall naturals materials, and we're going to load this one, the leather for the sofa, and we're going to load the glass. We're going to load every materials one by one and go ceiling, go to my rock, and literally load every one of them. We're going to drag and drop now, starting from the pictures. We're going to drag and drop to our selections material. There's two ways we can do. We can drag and drop. We also can do select the material and just choose the sofa and just go to the icon called the assign material to selection. Well, I think this method is a little more accurate. You don't accidentally drag to somewhere else, but whatever you prefer. This one is the break nature, so it's probably on the two of these materials that we're gonna basically show. So you have to be a little careful. Then we're gonna move this to the white reflecting with the ceiling. Is a little, it actually shows up for the bump maps, and right next to this show shed material viewports, you can turn things on or off when you move to that material channel there. So right there you can see the bump map has a material being assigned. Let's go move on to the rock, and the I'm gonna go to the, let me see, floor, and I need to load one more for the break wall white. That need to be over there. Okay, our material, most of our material has been thoroughly assigned, or dragging one by one. Is almost ready. And last thing we need to do is make sure that we need to make sure that we assign sunlight. We're gonna use V-Ray Sun. So we're gonna go to the create folders and go into the lights, and under the V-Ray roll out, we have something called the V-Ray Sunlight. We need to do several things before we dragging this into a vertical viewport, preferably not from the top viewport anymore, but anything vertical is very important. So we can do it from the longer location. We can change the sunlight later with V-Ray Sun. So the first thing we need to do, first of all, we need to increase a little bit intensity. So we're moving this to intensity multiplier. We're going to change this to 1.5. Now if you remember previous domino house, we lower this intensity multiplier to very low, 0.02, and the reason is because we don't have a camera. Now we do have a camera, so we can really adjust how the lights enter into the camera, and then we can control the brightness and contrast through the shutter speed, and also f-stop, and also the film speed. Right now we are changing this to increase this 1.5. It's good to we have minimum 1, so the solution, the sound photons will be traveling through our camera, going to everywhere, rather than less than 1. So it's very important we have this intensity more than 1. The next thing we need to adjust is the size multiplier. What this do is the size multiplier changes something very important. It gives the shadows of the sun, V-Ray Sun, more subtle, more softer. And I would probably not doing more than 5, but of course if it's more than 5, your render speed will suffer a little bit. So alright, from the left viewport we're going to somehow drag it right here, and it will ask us a question that would you like to automatic add a V-Ray sky environment map. I will certainly say yes. There will be adding a procedural sky, V-Ray sky. This procedural sky will change when you change your sun angle from the sunset all the way to the sunrise, sunset. We say yes. Now we need to orient this a little bit. We're going to drag in this a little bit because we want to creating a very interesting sun. It can either come from the loft windows. I mean, if you look closely, and that will enter this very nicely. Okay, next thing we need to do is we need to adjust our camera to make sure our camera does allow enough light into our camera. We need to jumping over this, keep the default f-stop to 8. That's very good. And next thing we need to do, we need to change our shutter speed. In this case is 1 over the second. We're going to start with 100, lower this even more. But the ISO speed from 800 we're going to lower to 100. So now the film is less sensitive. It actually allows less lights to accommodate 100 to the 100 film speed, because typically a nice daytime is 100 to 200 if sunny bright day. If it is a little darker, it's a little cloudier, we use 200. If it's nighttime, we use 400. And really night with no lights, we will change it to 800. Well, let's do a test rendering here, and we're gonna go to render setup, and we're gonna now going back, make sure everything is good. And Bob will take that out of that. Take out the get resolution from max. We don't need that. Make sure it's bucket. Increase a little bit to 4, and so we can control the minimum number of sample per pixel. Normal value is 1 will fine, but however we want to render a little better, you can beef this up a little bit. Maximum to 10. Pocket, of course, you know, the size of your render pocket is increased to 64. Global illumination 1680 everything's default. Now the GI, the ingredients may now beef up to medium size. This will take a little longer, but the quality will be better. And then we're going to change the subdivision at 2500 with a light cache. If everything is good, and if you do want to render a final renderings with a different size, which is very important for you to go to the frame buffer, make sure this is correct size. Now we're going to choose for test purpose for now. So remain to 640 by 480. You can certainly increase this to 1500 if you do want to submit your assignments. We're going to render this now. See how this come out first. You can certainly lower many of the parameters to make your rendering better and render a little faster. So right now we are just going to output this all to the final setup, and this should take a little while. I don't think it will take too long. Judging from the scene is very simple, and I think it should be fine. In a few minutes it should be okay. Okay, and our rendering now is being finished. You look closely, I mean, it's pretty nice, pretty decent, and of course this tutorial didn't really get into the material part. We have the second advanced tutorial about the material setup. In case you're interested of it, we will go through all the materials, and they are very simple material. V-Ray MTL, which is adequate for V-Ray rendering. We certainly will talk a little more about material setup, how to create your own material. So that will come up in the future tutorial and future sections. Hi, this is update videos on a new V-Ray Next engine, and I want to point out the difference between the previous release of 3.5 3.6. With this release, the V-Ray GPU, they're not much different in terms of the parameters. The order of folder, of course, there's a preference folder and a setting folder. They come from the original V-Ray folder, so the only thing actually are added to this new engine is IPR. Okay, This is quite new to V-Ray, and there's certain changes, and I have to make a note of it. So I'm going over this one more time in case you're a little confused, because this videos used previous release of V-Ray. So, and this one I'm just going to go over the same concept from the previous release. They are very identical. So you're looking over the render setting and global illumination. So we're going to just go very quickly. This, of course, we're going to talk about start the IPR. And of course, I highly recommend it if you want to run a very quick one. But I don't intend that you should be rendering your final rendering using this method. I think you can get this quicker method to get your illumination, your lights, and if it's all accurate, you can somehow have a quicker result. When your scene get heavier, I notice IPR didn't really help a lot. Okay, it's still quite a slow process, so you can pretty much know that V-Ray is still a very a renderer's more emphasis on quality rather than speed. Okay, you look at the global illumination. You use the light cache. So in this case, we have the two. One is called the V-Ray Next, and one is called V-Ray GPU. We're going to going back to V-Ray updates, next update. Don't use the GPU. We will talk about the GPU a little later. Now we're going to V-Ray, and we have going back to the image filter. Before we do that, we want to make sure that it's a pocket, and we want to make this the expert mode. If you choose the progressive, it will take quite a long time until it finish the percentage of your progressive percentage. We use pocket. It actually going to render with all the parameters intact. We're going to on for the image sampler. The image sampler is like a mob cleaning the tables of our images. So we're going to on for the default to including the expert mode. So you look at we want to make sure that progressive change to bucket is very important. And we need to change the image filter to black man. This is probably very good. It somehow make our image sharp, a little sharper than using other filter. Our big pocket image sampler, we're going to have 4 in subdivision minimum, and we're going to use maximum subdivision beef up to 10. Alright, now our global DMC, we're going to on for this to advanced. It does not have the export mode. Here we have 3 parameters kind of important. In case it's different than yours, make sure you change the minimum samples to 16, adaptive amount to 0.85. This is very important. If you change this number, can slow it down or make your image quality less. And the node threshold, you should change that to 0.01. And our color mapping, we will change this to Reinhardt. It's a very good combination. Make sure that is 2.2 for our gamma, and the rest of them we can leave this to default 1 and burn value 1 as well. We have nothing in the camera we need to change, so we're going to go to GI. We're going to choose the irradiance map. Like I said, it's always quicker if you choose the irradiance map. We should adjust this from very low to low, and then slowly increase this to medium in case you want to have a better quality of rendering. Especially in this case, it's a daylight scene, but it's interior, so we do have a sunlight come from the window. So therefore, it's good that for our preset we adjust very low and slowly to low and medium. So it's between low to medium. I wouldn't go higher than medium. And that cache, we can adjust this to maximum 2500. that will give us much better quality and will take longer to render. And going back to the V-Ray part, which I want to talk a little bit, which has significant change. There's one very important update in compared to the previous release, is if you change this to V-Ray GPU next, and under the V-Ray, he has this technologies of IPR technology. So if you look closely under the preference setting in V-Ray GPU render device select, you have two to choose. You have the CPU rendering and also your GPU rendering. I have a 1080 GPU rendering, is for gamer. I haven't tried the result of the two renderings, and the speed and the quality of course is all identical, but I noticed that if I use 1080 GPU, my rendering is a little bit faster. I render 500 by 500 pixels of the same rendering. You look at it, it takes roughly about 46.2 seconds for me to render. If I choose this entirely combination of CPU and GPU, I notice my rendering speed get a little slower, but probably roughly about 0.4 seconds. Alright, so again, it's about resolution, about complexity of your rendering. So I think it's not going to be significantly slower, but it's going to be slower. So because due to the fact my GPU, my graphic card, is slightly ahead of my CPU, because I have a very ancient CPU, i7 377 OK CPU, so it's about 5-6 years old, maybe even older than that. So, and if you have an i9, I think the result will be different. And I also noticed that if you have a Xeon processor and you render certain shaders, certain materials, it's gonna have a different result, faster result. So it's all the tasting, but I can tell you, if you have superior GPU, your V-Ray GPU next gonna be significantly faster. Alright, now I'm gonna switch this back to V-Ray next, and we're gonna go V-Ray, and we're gonna start with IPR. Like I said, IPR is interactive progressive rendering, so you're able to see this. Like I said, and when your scenes are getting heavier, you see this noise, slowly going render through. You can change. I'm just going to move them around. It's interactive, but it's the quality of rendering is not really if you have a very complex scene. So what does that mean? It means that you should, when you see the roughly, you got the lighting, and this is the time you ought to stop, because why waste your time doing this sort of rendering, because all these little noises, and eventually progressively it takes longer to render this. You can tell it's already 48.9 seconds. This rendering probably take about 46 seconds to render, so why waste your time on that? So we're going to switch this back to V-Ray next, and I'm going to go over all these things with you. So IPR, again, you really don't need to switch that to V-Ray GPU IPR, but if you do that, you only change, probably switch from your CPU. You have a slower CPU, you have a quicker video card, you're probably going to use your GPU. If you have a quicker CPU, a back graphic card, and of course you should go using your i9 and faster CPU, and the result may be surprising you, or maybe combination. Now going to your GI, I said your GI need to be in radiance map, and move every time you move, when you see that have been reset. So you make sure that you're going to your V-Ray GPU next, you should go back and reset everything again. We should move this to medium and 2500, and let's see everything else. If you do want to frame stamp, you can check. You can certainly check this later, so it will stamp your rendering anyway. So Now the next thing that you need to do is to make sure that and you go to the setting under the system and on for advanced parameters, and you choose the one very important parameter right here is dynamic memory limits. You should have a 0 if you have very you have a computer with a lot of memory, and you have a lot of memory to spare, so you don't have to reserve. I wouldn't recommend you to do a Google search and then rendering this. That's not very good, because it will take longer to render, and more you move, more you watch your videos, the longer it take for V-Ray to render. So it's not productive. Don't do that. Use maybe another backup machines, or maybe use a laptop or some other computer somewhere slower to do the serving. You should always dedicate this machine that you are working on it for rendering only. It might crash your system, so do not attempt to do that. Do not attempt to browsing and watching a video or YouTube's and then rendering at the same time. Don't do that. Alright, so you have a more memory. What you can do, you can perhaps change this to more meg, okay? Maybe adding another 0, because you have 32 gig of RAM. You don't really worry about it. If you have a very little RAM, and of course that's not very wise to do that, because larger the cache size can impact, as a matter of fact, how your entire Windows system working. So you might crash. Okay, you might crash your system. All right, so that's in terms of rendering. The last things we do is we render this, and you should be able to render. Again, how long it takes, it really depends what kind of machine that you have.